she said she wanted to spend it. It's very, very cute. But yes, like I said, opening question. we'll start with the opening question. So the easiest part is. So yeah, budget's coming up, and so this week you and Ben actually talked about whether it was going to be like populist or prudent. And from what I gather, right, everybody who you talk to seemed to think that yeah, it's going to be populist. But here's the damn thing: is it? Can the government even afford a populist budget, man? I mean, given that the coffers are running dry.
Whether it's going to be a populist budget or not, I think most people are saying yes, it will be populist. People are expecting the election to be held next year. Prime Minister has said that it won't be next year, it will be in 2018 when it's due. But even if it's due in 2018, they have to continue the feel-good factor. So can we afford it? Looking at the numbers this year, things don't look so good.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, oil revenue aside as well, but the stats that we pulled out were actually quite staggering. We are collecting quite a bit less. How much exactly less?
Well, the government knew that oil revenue was coming down. Petronas is giving a lower dividend. There's lower taxes coming from petroleum-related products. So they were hoping that GST will help. So this year's GST collection target was 39 billion. As of first half, we've only collected about 17 billion.
Which is like so far off the target.
Yeah,
with only so few months to go.
Exactly. So the second half of the year, we better make up for the other 22 billion that we need to make the target. But if you look at the bigger numbers, for example, first half revenue is at 96 billion, which is down 18.8% from a year ago. If you look at this year's revenue target collection, it was 225 billion. We're only at about 42.7% of that. So the next couple of months will be quite significant for the government to find the money to fund whatever.
Okay, so but hold on. So that means that even if when the budget comes out and they give like everything under the sun, more brim or whatever, right? The numbers seem to say that you're going to find that really hard to even give out what you're promised.
Correct. It's very, very tight. Will the government continue the big projects? Some projects have to carry on, but the development budgets have already come down.
Yeah.
Like if you look at this year's estimates of spending, the development part of the budget was only 52 billion.
Which is actually
which is quite low. So assuming that next year's estimates of revenue and spending is similar to what the government had planned for this year, it still looks very, very tight.
But let's speaking about spending and prudence and everything, right? The one thing that is mentioned is that, look, prudence, all of this stuff should actually start at home. And I was, I mean, vaguely surprised, but also not surprised to see that the Prime Minister's office, they take up quite a big chunk of development as well. And I was surprised to see that, it's not just wind or propaganda or whatever. The numbers you dug up showed that, holy cow, they're huge.
Yeah, so there has been, over the years, there has been criticism that the Prime Minister's department is bloated and takes up a lot of the budget. So we decided to go and look at the numbers across 3 Prime Ministers from Dr. Mahathir's time to Patla's time to present Prime Minister's time to see whether or not it was true. And we found out that yes, indeed it was true. So we say in the story that it's not really fair to compare what Dr. Mahathir allocated himself in the 1980s because the country was vastly different. The value of money was very, very different. So we looked at it in terms of Prime Minister's department budget allocation as a percentage of the federal government budget. And even when we broke it down to those ratios, you can see that it's creeping up. It used to be, Prime Minister's department spending used to be about 3 to 4, 5, maybe 5% of the total federal government budget. But in the last couple of years, it's inching up closer and closer to the 8 and 9%.
And we did get somebody to kind of say that the net present value, right, brought it up to current terms. Even then, the percentages didn't really change.
So based on the numbers we looked at, and all these are publicly available, we sent that off to an economist and he adjusted it to present day value. And you still can see from the charts that the spending in the Prime Minister's department has been going up year on year. So the Prime Minister, who is also the Finance Minister, is in charge of drawing up the budget. When he's looking at very, very tight finances, might he make a cut at home? I think that's what everybody will be looking out for.
But that's a criticism that I think a lot of people have actually said to them over the years, that you are giving out and giving out, but you're not making the kind of painful cuts.
Even in the good times, you cannot be spending taxpayer fund willy-nilly. We are in pretty tight times. So anybody you talk to about government spending, everybody will say the same thing. They really, really have to make sure that public administration is more efficient. There's no wastage, no leakages. Yeah. But it's easier said than done, isn't it?
Of course, of course. But the other thing that I fear when I read it was that they're going to tax the businesses. Where else are you going to get the money? You're going to go into corporate tax, right? You're going to tax businesses. But how far can you tax them until they do like what BAT said, up their stakes and says, I'm sorry, I'll go somewhere else where my cost base is easier. I mean, there has to be that balance, right?
Well, it's very, very tough because corporate tax is the single largest component of the government's revenue every year. Already our tax rate for companies is not very competitive if you could look around the Southeast Asia region. Like for example, Thailand's corporate tax is about 20%. We are in the mid-20s. We are competing with other countries, Vietnam, Indonesia, Philippines, for investment. Even getting, making sure that domestic companies will stay is a challenge. So do you increase taxes? Because that's the fastest way to improve your revenue collection. But over the long term, I think a lot of tax consultants think that increasing corporate tax rates will not result in higher earnings for the government. In fact, I think the guy at PwC said that if you lower the tax rate for companies, it may encourage companies to be more compliant. I think the government has announced that it will be intensifying tax audits on individuals and companies, and anecdotally they have done so. So that has to keep on going, but also look at what tax measures can be in place so that you can kind of balance the need to improve federal government revenue and not hurting businesses and people as well.
For more on the stories, pick up a copy of The Edge Weekly at all good newsstands.